She was chained and abandoned, until one human changed her fate forever. The planet Vorn smelled like rust and regret. Its skies glowed a sickly orange, choked with smoke from the factories that never stopped churning. Jace pulled his worn jacket tighter around him as he stepped through the crowded streets of the trading hub. He was a scavenger, a human who lived by picking through the galaxy's scraps. Old tech, broken ships, anything he could sell. Vorn was a rough place, a planet where aliens and humans mixed in a stew of greed and danger. Jace liked it that way. It kept him sharp. Today, he was hunting for something special. A piece of tech rumored to power shields, strong enough to block a starship's cannons. If he found it, he'd have enough credits to leave this dump for good. His boots splashed through oily puddles as he moved deeper into the market, past stalls selling glowing fruits, weapons that hummed with energy, and cages of squawking creatures. The noise was constant, shouts, clangs, and the buzz of neon signs lighting up the haze. Then he saw it. A crowd gathered near a rickety platform at the edge of the market. Jace slowed, his curiosity tugging at him. He edged closer, weaving between hulking aliens with scales and humans with scars. On the platform stood a woman, not human, but something else. Her skin shimmered like polished silver, catching the dim light in a way that made her glow. Heavy chains bound her wrists and ankles, clanking as she shifted. Her eyes, bright and sharp, glared at the crowd with a fire that didn't bend. She wore scraps of cloth, torn and dirty, but she stood tall, like she owned the place despite the chains. A short alien with a crooked grin stepped forward, his voice grating like metal on stone. "Step up, folks. A real alien, rare as they come. Strong, fierce, and worth every credit. Bid now or lose your chance." The crowd murmured, tossing out numbers. Some laughed, others leered. Jace felt his stomach twist. He'd seen plenty of ugly things in his travels. Slavery wasn't new, but this felt different. She wasn't just a prize to them. She was a trophy, something to show off. Her eyes locked onto his, cutting through the chaos like a blade. For a second, he froze. She didn't look scared or broken. She looked ready to fight, even with those chains holding her down. The bids climbed higher. 5,000 credits, 7,000. Jace's hand brushed the pouch at his side. He had 12,000 credits, his entire stash, saved for that shield tech. He could walk away, keep his plan, stay safe. But her gaze held him, daring him to do something. 12,000. Jace shouted, his voice loud enough to silence the crowd. Heads turned, eyes narrowing. The alien auctioneer blinked, then grinned wider. 12,000 credits, sold to the human in the jacket. A ripple of grumble spread through the crowd, but no one challenged it. Money talked on Vorn, and Jace had just spoken loudest. He climbed the platform, avoiding the auctioneer's slimy handshake, and knelt to unlock her chains. The metal was cold and rusted, biting into her silver skin. She didn't flinch as he worked, but her stare never left him. "Don't think I owe you," she said, her voice low and rough, like a storm brewing. "Didn't buy you to keep you," Jace replied, pulling the last chain free. She stumbled slightly, then straightened, towering over him by a head. "Name's Jace. We need to move. Now." Her eyes flicked to the crowd, where a few aliens were already whispering and pointing. She nodded once, sharp and quick. "Lyra," she said, like it was a warning. Together, they slipped off the platform and into the maze of Vorn streets. Shouts erupted behind them, angry traders who didn't like losing their prize. Jace led the way, ducking under pipes and dodging carts, while Lyra kept pace, her steps silent despite her size. They turned a corner, and a blaster shot scorched the wall beside them. Jace cursed under his breath, grabbing Lyra's arm to pull her into an alley. "Guess they're not happy," he muttered. She shook him off but followed, her silver skin glinting in the shadows. Ahead, the streets twisted into darkness. A chance to lose their pursuers, or a trap waiting to snap shut. Either way, Jace knew one thing. He'd just thrown away his safe, simple life for a stranger who didn't even trust him. And somehow, that felt right. The alley stretched ahead like a tunnel of shadows, its walls slick with grime and patched with rust. Jace's boots pounded the ground, each step echoing in the narrow space. Beside him, Lyra moved like a ghost, silent, quick, her silver skin catching faint glints from the flickering lights above. Behind them, the shouts of the traders grew louder, mixed with the sharp whine of blasters powering up. Jace didn't need to look back to know they were in trouble. He'd spent enough time on Vorn to recognize the sound of a hunt starting. "We need a place to hide," he said, his breath short as they rounded a corner. Lyra didn't answer, but her eyes scanned the alley, sharp and calculating. She pointed to a dented metal door half hidden behind a pile of broken crates. Jace nodded, shoving the crates aside with a grunt. The door creaked open, revealing a dark stairwell that smelled of oil and decay. They slipped inside, pulling the door shut just as footsteps thundered past outside. The stairwell led down to an abandoned factory, its floor littered with twisted pipes and dusty machines that hadn't run in years. Faint orange light seeped through cracked windows high above, painting the room in a dull glow. Jace let out a long breath, leaning against a rusted pillar. "That'll buy us some time," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Lyra stayed near the door, her posture tense, like a coiled spring ready to snap. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Her eyes locked onto him, bright and unyielding. Jace shrugged, pulling a water pouch from his jacket and taking the sip before offering it to her. She hesitated, then took it, drinking quickly. "Name's Jace. Just a guy who picks up what others throw away. You?" "Lyra," she said again, like it was all he needed to know. She handed the pouch back, her fingers brushing his for a split second. "I'm Elian. That's why they want me." "Elian?" Jace raised an eyebrow, sitting on a crate. "Never heard of that. What makes you so special?" She crossed her arms, her silver skin shimmering faintly as she moved. "My people are strong. Rare. Most think we're gone, wiped out by raiders years ago. To them." She jerked her head toward the door. "I'm a prize. Something to sell or show off." Her voice was bitter, but there was pride in it too, like a fire that refused to die. Jace nodded slowly. He'd seen plenty of folks, human and alien, treated like things instead of people. It never sat right with him. "Well, you're not a prize now. You're free. What you do next is up to you." Lyra's eyes narrowed, like she didn't believe him. "Why'd you do it? Spend all that money just to let me go?" He smirked, leaning back. "Didn't feel right, leaving you up there. Besides, I've got a knack for sticking my nose where it doesn't belong. Keeps life interesting." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased a little, like some of the weight had lifted. Before she could say more, a distant crash echoed from above. Metal banging against metal. Jace stood, his hand dropping to the small blaster at his hip. "Sounds like they're not giving up." Lyra moved to the window, peering through the cracks. Her jaw tightened. 3 of them. Big ones. "They've got scanners." Jace cursed under his breath. Scanners meant they'd find this place eventually. He scanned the factory, his mind racing. The machines were junk, but junk was his specialty. He spotted a pile of wires and a busted generator in the corner. "Can you fight?" he asked, already moving toward it. "I'm Elian," she said, like that was answer enough. She flexed her hands, and Jace noticed the faint scars on her wrists where the chains had been. "Good," he said, pulling the wires free. "Help me rig this. If they want us, they're getting a surprise." Together, they worked fast, Jace twisting the wires into a crude trap, Lyra hauling heavy pipes to block the stairwell. She moved with a strength that surprised him, lifting metal like it weighed nothing. He showed her how to connect the generator to the wires, setting it to spark if anyone tripped it. "They'll come down those stairs," he said, wiping his hands on his jacket. "When they do, this'll slow them down. Then we run." Lyra nodded, her expression hard but focused. "You're not like most humans I've met," she said, almost to herself. "Most humans haven't met you," he shot back, grinning. She didn't laugh, but her lips twitched, like she might have if things were different. The trap was ready just as the door above rattled, voices barking orders. Jace grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her behind a stack of crates. "Get ready," he whispered. The door burst open, and 3 hulking aliens stomped down the stairs. Big, scaly things with glowing scanners in their claws. The lead one stepped forward, and the wires sparked, sending a jolt of electricity through the air. The alien roared, stumbling back, but the others kept coming. "Now," Jace shouted. Lyra sprang up, slamming a pipe into the second alien's head with a force that dented the metal. Jace fired his blaster, hitting the third in the leg. The factory erupted into chaos, sparks flying, grunts and shouts filling the air. They fought back to back, moving like they'd done this 100 times. When the last alien hit the ground, groaning, Jace grabbed Lyra's hand. Time to go. They bolted for a side exit, slipping into the dark tunnels beneath Vorn. The traitors wouldn't stop, not with a prize like Lyra on the line. But as Jace ran, her silver form a blur beside him, he felt something shift. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving something. To her, to himself, maybe to the whole damn galaxy. The tunnels beneath Vorn twisted like the guts of some ancient beast, dark and damp, with walls that dripped water onto the cracked stone floor. Jace's breath came in quick bursts as he ran, his blaster still warm in his hand. Lyra kept pace beside him, her silver skin glinting whenever they passed a faint shaft of light from above. The sounds of the factory fight faded behind them, grunts and sparks swallowed by the heavy silence of the underground. For now, they'd lost the traitors, but Jace knew it wouldn't last. Those kinds of hunters didn't give up easy. He slowed to a jog, then stopped, leaning against the tunnel wall to catch his breath. Lyra stopped too, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows ahead. "They'll find us again," she said, her voice steady but low, like she was stating a fact instead of worrying. "Yeah," Jace agreed, holstering his blaster. "But we've got a head start. Let's use it." He pulled a small light from his jacket pocket, a scavenged thing that flickered but worked, and held it up. The tunnel split into 3 paths, each one disappearing into darkness. "Any guesses?" Lyra stepped forward, her head tilting as she studied the air. She closed her eyes for a moment, then pointed to the left path. "That one. The air's fresher. Might lead outside." Jace raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. "Elyon trick." "Something like that," she said, starting down the path without waiting. He followed, the light bouncing off the walls as they moved. The tunnel was tight, forcing them to duck under low overhangs and squeeze past jagged rocks. For a while, neither spoke, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant drip of water. Finally, Jace broke the silence. "Back there, with the pipe, you're stronger than you look. What else can Elyon do?" Lyra glanced at him, her expression guarded but not hostile. "We're built to survive. Stronger bones, sharper senses. Things you humans don't have." She paused, then added, "But you've got your own ways." That trap was smart. He grinned, ducking under a stalactite. "Years of messing with junk. You learn to make something out of nothing." He pulled a small gadget from his pocket, a tangle of wires and a cracked screen. "Like this, found it on a wrecked ship. Tracks heat signatures. Not much range, but it saved my skin a few times." She eyed it, curious despite herself. "Show me." Jace fiddled with it, and the screen blinked to life, showing 2 faint red dots. "Them. See. Us. If anything else shows up, we'll know." He handed it to her, and she turned it over in her hands, her fingers tracing the edges. "Humans and their toys," she muttered, but there was a flicker of interest in her voice. She handed it back, then reached into a crack in the wall, pulling out a thin, sharp stone. "Alien don't need toys. We use what's around us." With a quick flick, she threw the stone down the tunnel. It hit a loose rock, which rolled and triggered a small cave-in, blocking the path behind them. Jace whistled, impressed. "Okay, that's handy. Guess we're both full of surprises." For the first time, Lyra's lips curved into something close to a smile. Small, fleeting, but real. They kept moving, the tunnel widening into a cavern with a high ceiling. Stalactites hung like teeth, and a faint hum vibrated through the air. Jace's gadget beeped, and he froze. The screen showed 3 new dots, moving fast from the right. "Trouble," he said, pointing to a pile of boulders ahead. "Hide." They ducked behind the rocks just as footsteps echoed into the cavern. 3 aliens emerged, smaller than the factory ones, but armed with sleek blasters and glowing scanners. Jace peeked out, his mind racing. "Ambush," he whispered. "We hit them before they hit us." Lyra nodded, picking up a heavy stone. "You distract. I strike." Jace didn't argue. He grabbed a loose pebble and tossed it across the cavern. It clattered against the far wall, and the alien spun toward the sound, scanners whirring. That was the opening. Jace popped up, firing his blaster at the nearest one's weapon. It sparked and fell from its claws. Lyra moved like lightning, hurling the stone with deadly aim. It smashed into the second alien's head, dropping it instantly. The third turned, but Jace was already on it, tackling it to the ground and wrestling the blaster free. Breathing hard, they stood over the unconscious hunters. Lyra kicked a scanner aside, her chest heaving. "They're not the same ones from before," she said. "More are coming." Jace nodded, wiping dirt from his face. "Then we keep moving." But first, he sat on a flat rock, catching his breath. Lyra hesitated, then joined him, her silver skin streaked with dust. For a moment, they just sat there, the cavern quiet around them. "What's your story, Lyra?" he asked, keeping his tone light. "How'd you end up in chains?" She stared at the ground, her hands clenching. "My planet was attacked. Raiders came, big ships, bigger weapons. They took everything. My family fought, but..." She trailed off, her voice hardening. "I was the only one left. They sold me, and I've been passed around ever since. Until you." Jace swallowed, the weight of her words settling in. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. "No one should go through that." She looked at him, her eyes softer but still fierce. "And you? Why wander a place like Vorn?" He shrugged, picking at a thread on his jacket. "Never had much to call home. Parents were traders. Died in a crash when I was a kid. Been on my own since. Scavenging's all I know. Keeps me free, mostly." Lyra studied him, like she was seeing him for the first time. "Free," she echoed. "That's what I want too." Before he could reply, the gadget beeped again. More dots, closer now. Jace stood, offering her a hand. "Then let's keep you that way." She took it, her grip strong and sure, and they ran deeper into the tunnels, a spark of trust lighting the way. The tunnels gave way to a sprawling junkyard beneath Vorn's surface, a graveyard of broken ships and twisted metal stretching as far as the eye could see. The orange sky peeked through holes in the cavern roof, casting long shadows over the wreckage. Jace and Lyra emerged from the tunnel, their breaths visible in the cool, stale air. The gadget in Jace's hand beeped faintly, but no red dots appeared yet. They'd bought themselves a moment, but it wouldn't last. Jace scanned the junkyard, his scavenger instincts kicking in. "Plenty to work with here," he said, kicking a dented panel aside. "We could rig something. Slow them down again." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she looked around, her silver skin catching the dim light. "They're not just chasing me for sport," she said, her voice tight. "There's something they want, something I know." Jace turned to her, frowning. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My people, The alien. We had a secret. A weapon, hidden before the raiders came. They think I can lead them to it. That's why they won't stop. A weapon? Jace's mind raced. What kind? Lyra shook her head. I don't know everything. Just that it's powerful. And dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands. My father told me where it's buried. But I swore I'd never tell. Jace rubbed his jaw, glancing at the junk around them. Guess that explains the extra muscle. They're not just traders. They're hired guns. He paused, meeting her gaze. You don't have to tell me where it is, but if we're gonna get out of this, we need a plan. She nodded, her expression hardening. Then we fight. Use this place. Make them regret coming after us. Jace grinned, already spotting a rusted fuel canister half buried in the dirt. I like the way you think. They got to work, moving fast. Jace dragged the canister to a narrow path between two wrecked ships, rigging it with a wire from his pack. Lyra hauled heavy beams, stacking them into a makeshift barricade. Her strength was unreal. She lifted pieces that would have taken Jace an hour to budge, her muscles flexing under her shimmering skin. Set this to blow when they trip it, Jace said, attaching the wire to a small detonator he'd scavenged years ago. You take the high ground, hit them from above when it goes off. Lyra climbed atop a ship's hull, her movements silent and sure. She picked up a jagged metal shard, testing its weight like a spear. Ready, she called down. Jace crouched behind the barricade, his blaster in one hand, the gadget in the other. The screen flickered, 5 dots now, closing in fast. Here they come, he muttered. The air grew tense, the hum of the junkyard's silence broken by distant footsteps. Then they appeared, 5 aliens, bigger than the last group, clad in dark armor and carrying rifles that glowed at the tips. The lead one stepped forward, its voice a guttural rasp. Give us the alien, human. You don't know what you're protecting. Jace smirked, staying low. She's not for sale. Try taking her. I dare you. The alien snarled, raising its rifle, but its foot caught the wire. The canister exploded in a burst of flame and smoke, sending 2 of them sprawling. Lyra leaped from the ship, her shard flashing as she drove it into the nearest alien's shoulder. It roared, swinging at her, but she ducked and kicked its legs out from under it. Jace fired his blaster, hitting another in the chest. The armor took most of the shot, but it stumbled, giving him time to roll behind a crate. The 5th alien charge, its rifle spitting energy bolts that scorched the ground near Jace's feet. He dove, grabbing a loose pipe and swinging it hard into the alien's knee. It buckled, and Lyra finished it with a swift strike from above. The fight was brutal and fast, metal clashing, grunts echoing, smoke stinging their eyes. Jace and Lyra moved like a team, her strength covering his blind spots, his quick thinking turning junk into weapons. When the last alien fell, its armor cracked and smoking, they stood panting amidst the wreckage. Jace wiped blood from a cut on his cheek, grinning at Lyra. Not bad for a scavenger and an alien, huh? She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. You fight like you mean it, she said, brushing dirt from her hands. Why? Because I hate bullies, he replied, holstering his blaster. And because you're worth it. For a moment, she just looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. Then she turned, pointing to a half-buried ship at the junkyard's edge. That one. It's got a hull. If we can get it running, we're off-born. Jace followed her gaze, his heart lifting. A ship. Now you're talking my language. They hurried over, prying open the hatch. Inside was a mess. Wires dangling, consoles cracked. But Jace saw potential. Engines look intact. Give me an hour, I can make it fly. Lyra climbed in after him, her expression shifting. If we leave, they'll follow. The weapon. I can't let them have it. Then we don't just run, Jace said, pulling tools from his pack. We find your people. Get that weapon first. You in? She stared at him, then nodded, a flicker of hope breaking through her guarded look. "I'm in." They worked together, Jace stripping wires and patching circuits, Lyra clearing debris with her strength. The ship groaned as its systems flickered to life, a faint hum building in the air. But outside, the junkyard stirred, more footsteps, heavier this time. Jace glanced at Lyra, his hand steady on the controls. "Guess freedom's worth fighting for," he said. She gripped a metal rod, ready for whatever came next. "Always has been," she replied. The ship trembled, and the fight for their future was just beginning. The junkyard ship shuddered as its engine sputtered to life, a low rumble shaking the dust from its rusted frame. Jace sat at the controls, his hands moving fast over the cracked console, coaxing the old machine to wake up. Wires sparked where he patched them, but the hum grew steadier, a sign of hope in the dim cockpit. Lyra stood beside him, her silver skin streaked with grime, her eyes fixed on the junkyard beyond a cracked windshield. The heavy footsteps outside were closing in, boots on metal, voices barking orders. "Hold on," Jace said, flipping a switch. The ship lurched, its thrusters coughing out a plume of smoke. Lyra braced herself against the wall as the vessel lifted, scraping against the cavern roof with a screech that set Jace's teeth on edge. Through the windshield, he saw them, dozens of armored aliens pouring into the junkyard, rifles raised, their scanners glowing red in the haze. "They're here," Lyra said, her voice calm but tight. She gripped the metal rod she'd picked up, ready to fight if the ship didn't make it. "It'll fly," Jace muttered, more to himself than her. He slammed the throttle forward, and the ship shot upward, breaking through a weak spot in the cavern ceiling. Rocks tumbled past as they burst into Vorn's open air, the orange sky swallowing them whole. Blaster shots chased them, pinging off the hull, but the ship held together. Barely. Jace let out a shaky laugh as they climbed higher, the junkyard shrinking below. "Told you I'd get it running." Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You're reckless," she said, but there was a hint of something softer in her tone. Respect, maybe, or trust starting to take root. She moved to a side panel, peering at the stars through a small, grimy window. "We need a course. I can guide us." "You navigate?" Jace asked, raising an eyebrow. He kept one hand on the controls, steering them out of Vorn's smoky atmosphere. "Elian read the stars," she replied, tracing a finger across the glass. "Our elders taught us patterns, maps in the sky. I know where my people hid the weapon. It's far, but I can get us there." Jace nodded, impressed. "All right, star reader, where to?" She studied the stars for a moment, then pointed to a cluster glowing faintly in the distance. "There, a system called Kaler. It's got an asteroid field. Good cover if they chase us." "Kaler it is," Jace said, adjusting the ship's trajectory. The engines groaned, but they held, pushing the ship into the void. For a while, they sat in silence, the hum of the ship filling the space between them. Vorn's orange glow faded behind, replaced by the endless black of space, dotted with pinpricks of light. Jace leaned back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Never thought I'd be flying off with an alien to find some secret weapon. Life's funny like that." Lyra turned from the window, sitting across from him on a bolted-down crate. "Why do this, Jace? You could have walked away, kept your credits, your safe little life." He shrugged, meeting her gaze. "Safe's boring. And I've seen too many folks get crushed by people who think they own everything. You didn't deserve that platform, those chains. Figured I'd give you a shot at something better." She studied him, her bright eyes searching his face. "And what do you want? What's your better?" Jace hesitated, then grinned. "A ship that doesn't fall apart mid-flight would be a start. Maybe a place to call my own someday. Nothing fancy, just enough to stop running." Lyra nodded slowly, like she understood more than she let on. "I want my people back," she said quietly. "The alien were scattered, taken, killed, or lost. If that weapon can bring them home, I'll fight for it." Then we're fighting for the same thing, Jace said. Freedom, just different kinds. Before she could reply, an alarm blared from the console, a sharp, insistent beep. Jace spun to the controls, his stomach dropping. Proximity alert. We got company. Through the windshield, two sleek ships emerged from Vorn's shadow, their hulls gleaming like knives in the starlight. Blasters flared as they opened fire, energy bolts streaking toward the junkyard ship. Jace yanked the controls, banking hard to the left. The ship groaned, a panel popping loose overhead, but it held. Asteroid field. Lyra shouted, pointing ahead. A cluster of rocks floated in the distance, jagged and spinning slowly. Got it, Jace said, pushing the throttle to its limit. The enemy ships closed in, their shots rattling the hull. He wove through the first asteroids, the ship tilting and scraping as he dodged. Lyra gripped the console, her knuckles pale against her silver skin. Closer, she urged. Jace gritted his teeth, steering into the thick of the field. A massive asteroid loomed ahead, and he pulled up at the last second, skimming its surface. One enemy ship wasn't fast enough. It slammed into the rock, exploding in a silent burst of flame. The second ship hung back, cautious now. Jace spotted a narrow gap between two spinning asteroids. Hold tight, he said, diving through. The hull screamed as it grazed the rocks, but they made it, emerging on the other side. The enemy hesitated, then turned, disappearing into the dark. Jace exhaled, slumping in his seat. That's one way to lose a tail. Lyra let out a breath she'd been holding, her shoulders easing. You're good at this, she said, almost surprised. Had to be, he replied, flashing a grin. You're not so bad yourself. She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed, a silent acknowledgement of their teamwork. The ship drifted through the asteroid field, safe for now, the stars stretching out ahead. Jace set the autopilot, letting the quiet settle in. Lyra stayed by the window, her gaze lost in the sky, and he wondered what she saw. Memories, hope, or something else entirely. We'll make it, he said, more promise than guess. She glanced back, nodding once, and in that moment, the journey felt bigger than either of them. Two souls chasing freedom among the stars. The asteroid field faded behind them as the junkyard ship cruised through the quiet expanse of space, its engines humming a shaky but steady tune. Jace kept one eye on the console, watching for any sign of the enemy ships that had chased them. The screen stayed clear, but he didn't relax. Not yet. Beside him, Lyra sat cross-legged on the crate, her silver skin catching the faint glow of the stars outside. She'd been silent since their escape, her gaze distant, like she was piecing something together in her mind. We're close, she said finally, breaking the stillness. Keller's moon is ahead. That's where the weapon's hidden. Jace glanced at her, then at the small gray dot growing larger through the windshield. Good. Let's hope it's worth the trouble. He adjusted the controls, steering toward the moon. Its surface was scarred with craters, a desolate ball of rock floating alone in the dark. Any idea what we're looking for? Lyra stood, moving to the console. A chamber. Underground. My father said it's marked with alien symbols, circles inside circles. We'll know it when we see it. Jace nodded, trusting her lead. The ship dipped into the moon's thin atmosphere, rattling as it descended. He guided it toward a flat stretch near a cluster of craters, landing with a jolt that sent dust swirling around them. The engines whined down, and silence settled over the cockpit. Looks cozy, Jace said, grabbing his blaster and a small pack of tools. Ready. Lyra picked up her metal rod, her grip firm. Always. They stepped out into the moon's low gravity, their boots crunching on the rocky ground. The air was thin but breathable, a cold bite against Jace's skin. Lyra moved ahead, her steps light and sure, scanning the terrain. After a few minutes, she stopped near a shallow crater, kneeling to brush away dust. Beneath it, faint lines appeared, circles within circles, carved deep into the stone. "Here," she said, her voice steady but laced with something heavier. "Memory, maybe, or hope." Jace joined her, running his fingers over the symbols. "How do we get in?" Lyra pressed her hand against the center, and the ground trembled. A slab of rock slid aside, revealing a dark tunnel sloping downward. She glanced at Jace, her eyes bright. "Follow me." They descended, the tunnel walls smooth and etched with more alien markings. Jace's light flickered, casting shadows that danced across Lyra's silver form. The air grew warmer as they went deeper, until the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. In the center stood a tall, sleek device, metal and crystal, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. It wasn't a weapon in the way Jace had expected, no barrels or triggers, but it pulsed with power, like it was alive. "That's it?" he asked, stepping closer. Lyra nodded, her expression softening. "It's not a weapon, not like they think. It's a beacon. My people built it to call the alien home. If I activate it, every survivor out there will hear it. They'll know where to find us." Jace blinked, processing her words. "So the traitors wanted to lure your people into a trap. Sell them off like they tried with you." "Yes," she said, her voice hardening. "But if we use it first, we can save them." She paused, looking at him. "Or we can run. Keep it hidden. Your choice too, Jace." He stared at the beacon, its light reflecting in his eyes. Running would be safer. Keep them off the radar. Let him rebuild his quiet life. But then he thought of Lyra on that platform, chained and defiant, and all the others like her, scattered and lost. "We're not running," he said firmly. "Let's bring them home." Lyra's lips curved into a rare, full smile, small but real. She stepped to the beacon, placing her hand on a crystal panel. It flared brighter, a low hum filling the chamber. "It's done," she said. "The signal's out." Before Jace could respond, the ground shook. A sharp, violent jolt. Dust rained from the ceiling, and his gadget beeped wildly. "Company," he said, drawing his blaster. "They must have tracked us." Lyra gripped her rod, her stance shifting to fight mode. "Then we hold them off. The beacon needs time to reach everyone." They ran back to the tunnel's entrance just as a ship roared overhead, landing hard outside. 6 aliens spilled out, tall, armored, with rifles that crackled with energy. The leader stepped forward, its voice a guttural snarl. "You've got nowhere to go, human. Hand over the alien and the device, or we bury you here." Jace smirked, stepping in front of Lyra. "You'll have to dig deep." The aliens charged, and the fight erupted. Lyra swung her rod, smashing it into one's chest with a force that cracked its armor. Jace fired, ducking behind a rock as bolts flew past. They were outnumbered, but the tunnel's mouth was narrow, perfect for a stand. Lyra took down another with a swift strike, while Jace tripped a third with a wire he'd rigged on the way in. But the leader was smarter. It hung back, aiming a heavy rifle at the beacon's chamber. "One shot, and your hope's gone," it growled. Jace's heart raced. They couldn't lose it. Not now. "Lyra, cover me," he shouted, sprinting toward the leader. She leaped, blocking a blast with her rod, giving him the opening. He tackled the alien, wrestling the rifle free and smashing its scanner with the butt. It roared, clawing at him, but Lyra finished it with a blow to the head. The last 2 fled to their ship, lifting off in a panic. Jace and Lyra stood panting, the beacon's hum steady behind them. "Think that's the last of them?" he asked, wiping blood from his lip. "For now," Lyra said, her eyes on the sky. "But more will come." Jace grinned, holstering his blaster. "Good thing we're tougher." She didn't reply, but her look said enough. A partnership forged in fire, ready for whatever came next. The moon's surface lay still under the faint blue glow of the beacon's signal, its hum echoing softly through the chamber behind Jace and Lyra. Dust settled around them, kicked up by the fight and the fleeing ship. Jace leaned against the tunnel wall, catching his breath, his blaster still warm in his hand. Lyra stood tall, her silver skin streaked with dirt and blood. Not hers, but the enemy's. Her eyes stayed on the sky, watching the stars as if she could see the alien out there, hearing the call she'd sent. "It's working," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They'll come." Jace pushed off the wall, joining her at the entrance. "How long?" "Hours, maybe days," she replied, her voice steady but laced with something new. "Hope, fragile but growing. The signal will reach them wherever they are." He nodded, glancing back at the beacon. "Then we hold this ground till they get here. No more running." Lyra turned to him, her bright eyes meeting his. "You don't have to stay, Jace. This isn't your fight." He smirked, holstering his blaster. "Pretty sure it became my fight the second I spent my last credits on you. Besides, I'm not big on leaving things half done." For a moment, she just looked at him, her expression softening in a way he hadn't seen before. Then she nodded, a silent agreement sealing their pact. They moved back to the junkyard ship, its battered hull a stark contrast to the sleek enemy vessels they'd faced. Jace climbed inside, checking the console. "Engines are still good. We can use her to guard the beacon if more show up." Lyra followed, settling into the co-pilot's seat. "They will," she said. "The traitors won't let this go. Not after what we've done." "Let 'em come," Jace said, his grin sharp. "We've handled worse." The hours passed in quiet tension. Jace tinkered with the ship's systems, boosting its shields with scavenged parts from the chamber. Lyra kept watch, her rod resting across her knees, her senses tuned to every sound. The moon's silence was eerie, broken only by the beacon's hum and the occasional creak of the ship. Then, as the sky darkened, the console blared, a warning screech that snapped them both alert. "Ships," Jace said, his hands flying over the controls. Through the windshield, 3 dark shapes dropped from orbit, their engines glowing red against the black, bigger than the last ones. Lyra gripped her rod, standing. "They're here for the beacon." Jace powered up the ship, its thrusters roaring to life. "Then we give 'em a welcome." The junkyard ship lifted off, wobbling but steady, and soared toward the intruders. Blaster fire lit up the sky as the enemy opened up, bolts slamming into the shields Jace had patched together. They held, for now. He banked hard, dodging a barrage, while Lyra manned a makeshift turret Jace had rigged from spare parts. She fired, her aim true, sending a burst of energy into one ship's wing. It spiraled, crashing into the moon's surface in a bloom of fire. "Nice shot," Jace shouted, pulling the ship into a tight loop. The second enemy closed in, its weapons tearing at the hull. Alarms screamed as a panel blew out, sparks raining down. Jace gritted his teeth, steering through the chaos. "We're not done yet," he muttered, diving low over a crater. The enemy followed, too close. And that was his chance. He ganked the controls, pulling up at the last second. The pursuer smashed into the crater's edge, erupting in a silent explosion. The third ship hesitated, then turned to flee. But before Jace could chase it, a new sound cut through the static, a deep, resonant hum, different from the beacon. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "That's them," she whispered. From the stars, ships emerged, not the sleek, cruel designs of traitors, but rugged, angular vessels marked with alien symbols. Dozens of them, descending like a storm. The fleeing enemy ship didn't stand a chance. An alien craft fired, reducing it to debris in seconds. Jace eased the junkyard ship back to the ground, watching in awe as the fleet landed around the beacon's chamber. Silver-skinned figures stepped out, tall and strong, their faces a mix of shock and relief as they saw Lyra. One approached, an older woman with deep lines etched into her shimmering skin. "Lyra," she said, her voice trembling. "You're alive." Lyra stepped forward, her rod falling to her side. "Elder Mara," she replied, bowing her head slightly. "I sent the call. The Ilion are home." Mara's eyes glistened as she pulled Lyra into a tight embrace. Others gathered, their voices rising in a chorus of joy and disbelief. Jace hung back, leaning against the ship, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He'd never seen anything like it. People finding each other after so long apart. Lyra broke away from the crowd, walking back to him. "You did this," she said, her tone firm but warm. "Without you, none of them would be here." "We did it," Jace corrected, meeting her gaze. "Team effort." Mara approached, her eyes sharp but kind. "Human," she said, "you've given us back our future. Name your reward." Jace glanced at Lyra, then shrugged. "Just keep her out of chains. That's enough for me." Mara nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "You're welcome among us, always." Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "What now, Jace?" "Back to scavenging." He looked at the stars, then at the alien fleet, then back at her. "Thought I might stick around. See what's out there with you. If you'll have me." Her smile returned, small, but brighter than before. "I'd like that." The junkyard ship lifted off again, this time with an alien escort, heading into the unknown. Two unlikely allies, bound by a fight for freedom, soared toward a new dawn, one where chains were broken, and the stars were theirs to claim.